It's the chaos, I think, that makes me love doing things a little different. I mean, yes, it's nice to have things good and orderly, but we're not Presbyterian. We're not so concerned with order that it becomes our entire existence. A little bit of chaos can be a lot of fun. Like, that's the third time that thing has turned into a sale today. It'll probably do it again. I'm not worried about it. But sometimes it's these little reminders of chaos that's minor can make us feel a lot better about the things that are chaotic, that are major. Because we all go through things in our lives that turn everything around. As we've been going through the book of Job, we've really seen how someone has been dealing with their life being turned upside down. If you remember back to Job chapter 1, in the span of about 5 minutes, he found out that he lost everything. All his wealth, all his children, all gone, like that. And then not long after that, you find out that he ends up getting tremendously sick. So much so that he curses the very day that he was born. And then, just to top it all off, his 3 best friends show up and tell him exactly why all this terrible stuff happened to him. Oh, Job, you must have sinned. That's why all this stuff's happening. You must have did something wrong, and now God's mad at you. And Job the whole time is going, I didn't do anything wrong. And they said, yes, you did. And Job says, no, I didn't. And they say, yes, you did. And Job says, no, I didn't, for 38 chapters. It is beautiful Hebrew poetry. It's also terrible advice and incredibly frustrating to read. But we get this sense that Job is getting increasingly frustrated, his friends are getting increasingly frustrated, and then God shows up. And God finally, he shows up, he's going to answer the question, why has all this terrible stuff happened to Job? And do you know what his answer was? Isn't creation cool? Like, dead serious. You read God's whole speech. It's talking about all the cool stuff that he made. He goes on for about 6 verses about an ostrich running. An ostrich. God is apparently really excited about ostriches. But it's really disappointing. We don't actually hear the answer that we've been looking for of why is all this happening? It's kind of like when a child is told by their parent that they can't do something because I said so. There is nothing more frustrating for a child than to hear, why can't I do this? Because I said so. Even if you give a minor reason, it makes it make more sense. Like, don't touch the stove. Hey, good idea. I mean, well, not touching the stove is a good idea too, but the rope is a good idea. So when a child just hears, don't touch the stove, without any context, it's like, well, why shouldn't I touch the stove? The stove is nice. It looks very touch-worthy. I'm just going to go and boop. But if you say something like, don't touch the stove, it's hot and it will burn you, then maybe the kid will go, oh, that actually makes sense. I can follow that logic. They're still going to touch it, but they'll be more careful. Because if you know when you go to a restaurant and as soon as the server puts a plate down and they say, it's hot, I always am just like, I need to move my plate. I know it's hot. I'm just going to be more careful. There's actually been studies that people have done that if you give a reason for something, people are more likely to be okay with it. Like if you're in line at a fast food place and somebody all of a sudden cuts in front of you, you're going to be really mad at them. But if they cut in front of you and say, I'm just getting a refill, you'll probably be like, oh, well, okay, your thing's going to be a lot quicker than mine. That's fine. Having reasons just makes more sense. Which is why it's so frustrating that when Job asks the question, why do terrible things happen to people who don't deserve it? it's really disappointing to hear creation's really cool. Because while, yes, creation is really cool, we're enjoying it right now. But that doesn't answer the question. But at the same time, it kind of does. Because in a lot of ways, the book of Job fits the pattern of a myth. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions that we have about myths. We automatically assume that when we're talking about a myth, it must not be true. But that's not really what a myth is. Whether something actually happened or not isn't particularly important for myth. So something can be a myth, but still absolutely have happened. Like, and the cool thing about myths is that the question that they ask isn't the one that's answered. For example, there's a Native American myth about the crow. Why does the crow have black wings? Well, the way the myth goes, the crow was flying around and the sun was too hot and everybody was pretty unhappy with this. So the crow decided that it was going to fly up to the sun and make the sun be cooler. And the crow did. And that's why the crow has such a terrible raspy voice and all its feathers are black. Now, of course, the message isn't the crow has black feathers because it flew to the sun. The message is you should be worried about people other than yourself first. Similarly, in the Bible, there's a myth about why we have rainbows. It's a great myth, kind of dark myth, but it's a good myth. You see, we have rainbows because one day God was really unhappy with humanity and he decided that he was going to start over creation and he was going to destroy everybody except Noah. And Noah built an ark and the ark was a boat and the boat rose when the rains came. And then after 40 days, the rain stopped and the water receded. And God said that there wasn't going to be another flood because he was going to put a rainbow in the sky. The message is stop being so selfish. The message isn't the story, it's what's behind the story. And so like it, we come to Job. And Job is wondering, why is all this stuff happening to me? I don't deserve it. And God shows up and says, look at all this cool stuff I made. Look at how I care for the ostrich, the birds, the snakes, the cows. He likes cows too. Look at how I even care about the water buffalo or the hippopotamus. It's not quite clear what the behemoth is. It's either the water buffalo or the hippopotamus. I hope it's the hippopotamus. Look at the Leviathan, which might be a giant water crocodile. We're not entirely sure on the Leviathan. But he starts talking about all these things that he made and all these things that he loves and all these things that he takes care of. So the message is, when we ask the question, why does all this bad stuff happen? The answer is you can trust God. It's not the answer that you directly get. That's the beautiful thing about these kinds of stories. Because the answer is that God can be trusted. It's exactly what God says to Job in chapters 38 and 40 through 41. 3 chapters of him talking about how great creation is. Because if God can tell the ocean when to stop, we know he's bigger than our troubles. If God can set the foundations of the world, we know he's bigger than our troubles. That doesn't mean that when bad stuff happens to us, it's because we made God mad or because it's in God's plan. I hate that one so much, by the way. If something terrible happens to someone and they say it's in God's plan, I don't like that because that makes God seem like kind of a jerk. And the God I know isn't, well, sometimes he's a jerk, but only when we deserve it. Only when we deserve it. You can't talk about the flood and then you kind of got to, yeah. Because when things happen in the world, sometimes they really don't have any reason. And that's why it can be so reassuring to then hear, but we can trust God. Because in Job's case, he did nothing to deserve what he got. There was no reason for it. There was nothing we can point to and say, oh, yep, Job, if you draw a line from here to 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 here, you end up at there. I think this is why conspiracy theories are so popular. Because when people can't understand something, they make stuff up. My personal favorite is the conspiracy about the moon landing. Because everyone knows they hired, what's his name? What's the famous director? No, farther ago. Kubrick. Everyone knows that NASA, when they were looking to go to the moon, they hired Stanley Kubrick to fake it. Now, NASA made a terrible decision there because if you know anything about Stanley Kubrick movies, you know that he would have had to film on location. But when people see things in the world that they can't understand, they draw these lines to help make sense of it. Like someone will look and say, oh, I don't understand that we could have gone to the moon. It must have been faked. And they draw these lines to make a connection. I feel safe talking about the moon landing one in this crowd because I'm sure many of you know folk who worked on that project. So I think it's safe to say that no one here is a moon landing conspiracy theorist. So this message from God that we get in Job, that when bad things happen, we can trust God, is really kind of the center. It's the thing that makes us remember what Jesus says in Matthew 7. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So why do bad things happen in the world? You can trust God. It's that simple. It's that hard. Because it's not easy when we find ourselves in those moments to put our trust in God. But he reminds us all the time that when we're going through trouble, when chaos is happening around us, God is stable. God is trustworthy. He created everything that we see. From the very earth we're standing on to the ostrich that he loves to see run. And each one of us. So remember that when we find ourselves wondering, why is this happening? Trust God. Because if he cares for the little birds flying around, how much more does he care for you?